recording before I launch. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining this Conversations with Scientists. Today, we are going to be discussing non-research careers, and we have a wonderful set of panelists who are going to share with us their journey into a very different set of careers, how they got there, how their PhD prepared them or didn't for those careers. So I am going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. First of all, we have Dr. Edgardo Falcón-Morales. Say hi, Edgardo. I know that we can hear you.
Hello, everyone.
All right, there he is. So Edgardo is a health program specialist in the Office of Programs to Enhance Neuroscience Work for Diversity at NINDS, and that's the National Institute of Neurological Diseases and Stroke, where he works in the overseeing and analysis of several diversity-targeted training mechanisms. Let's see, let me get my other biographies. We have Dr. Marga Gual Soler. Say hello, Marga.
Hello.
Marga is a project director at the Center for Science Diplomacy at the American Association for the Advancement of Science, where she explores the role of science as a universal language to help break down barriers and build bridges between peoples and nations. Marga wears many, many other hats, but in the sake of time, I am not going to read them. I'm going to let you read them. And then last but not least, we have Dr. Rudy Bellani, who is an innovation lead with EY, where he does software innovation. So welcome, Dr.
Hi, everybody.
Edgardo, Marga, and Rudy. Hello, Rudy. Thank you so much for joining us and for spending some time with us tonight. So the way these conversations work, we have some of our fellows are discussants, and they're going to be taking the lead in asking you guys questions, but of course everybody can pitch in and submit your ideas and your questions. But because we have such a diverse set of careers represented within our panelists, I wanted to ask each of them to briefly tell us a little bit more about what they do and kind of important milestones in their journey to do what they do now. Like, how did you guys go from being a researcher at the bench to whatever it is that you do now? So I will start with Marga.
Hi, everyone. It's really a pleasure to meet you all, and it's always a pleasure to collaborate with Monica and Giovanna in Ciencia, Puerto Rico. I want to keep this short, and I'm sure you'll have questions, so I'll just I wanted to run through a number of milestones, as Monica just said, about my career, and then touch a little bit of what I'm doing now, and then let you choose what you found most interesting or intriguing, or you want to learn more about. My background is in molecular cell biology. So I'm from Spain. I moved from Spain to Australia for my PhD, and I got as I was saying, a degree in molecular cell biology. I never thought I was gonna leave the lab or be, in an alternative career or anything other than academia, because I was never presented with options. I never, as science, none of my professors or mentors or anyone even told me or even presented the option of doing something else. So it was really out of frustration that I started to explore those other possibilities on my own, because to me it was really, the ecosystem that was around me in science didn't even consider that there was any option for scientists to be useful outside the lab. And that sounds really harsh, but it is true. I think we have to be honest, and especially here we are family. So it is very important to recognize the shortcomings of the system and the incentives and the drivers that motivate people to tell us that this is the one only path that we have ahead of us. So I was in the lab, I was in a microscopy, so I spent a lot of time alone in the confocal microscopy room. And that more and more felt, that was not satisfying for me, because going into science, I'm interested in your motivations for going into science in the first place. I would love to discuss that, because for me, going into science was much more broad and impactful than I was experiencing in the lab. Even if I love the science and it was really cool to do the experiments and discoveries, I didn't feel that was so fulfilling enough. So exploration, meaning on the internet or on Twitter, really out of the box approaches that I had to take to realize that there was an entire world outside academia where scientists can be useful. So after my PhD, I moved to the UN in New York. So that's how I made this leap and the jump outside of academia. I did an internship in the UN, and my internship was unpaid, and I was the only PhD scientist in the whole internship program of the UN, which is about 300 people per year. And being in New York, being at the UN and being the only scientist really showed me, firsthand the need for more people like us in those spaces. I realized that science was pervasive and ubiquitous in all issues that the UN was working on. It could be climate change, it could be food security or global health. Anything that the UN was dealing with had a scientific dimension. And to my surprise, there were no scientists there in the headquarters or in staff to really deal with those issues. The experts were brought in for like 2 days to talk about that issue, and then they were basically sent back to their labs and their universities. And the staff at the UN didn't have the scientific expertise in-house to process that information. So I thought there was a gap, and with that there was an opportunity for me and people like me, and maybe hopefully some of you, to try to bridge this gap. And I found a niche, and I thought if more people try to get into the science society policy interface, the UN and others, including governments and many other stakeholders, could much faster advance towards the solutions that we're all trying to arrive to. So from New York, I moved to Washington, D.C., where I'm now. I realized that as a scientist, I had some knowledge gaps and skills gaps. So it was not just a matter of motivation, of thinking, oh, I want to work outside academia, I want to help these policy problems or these global problems. I need to train myself first, because science in academia didn't provide me with these skills that I needed to thrive and succeed outside of that environment. And obviously that's why programs like this one exist, and we are part of a growing trend of leadership training and initiatives that people like you can benefit from, but that didn't exist very much 5 or 6 years ago when I was trying to do that transition. So I came to DC, I joined a leadership program at Georgetown, and for 3 months I basically learned everything that I didn't have before. So communication skills, negotiation skills, teamwork, business, all those skills and all the stuff that you don't learn as a scientist, because it's not supposed to be necessary for your work, which is publication and grant writing. Even though communication is hugely important, as we know, to give a talk, but that it's always it's secondary to the science and to doing the research and publishing the research first. And after Georgetown, I was ready to work in this new space, and I joined AAAS. And AAAS, for those of you who don't know, I guess many of you know, but we are a scientific society, but we are much more than that. It's not just bringing scientists together, but we have active programs in many areas, including communication, policy, and diplomacy. And science diplomacy is my expertise now. So I brought from the UN this idea that science could benefit global development, global relationships, and be a vehicle for understanding between countries. And I found that AAAS had an entire department dedicated to that. So I joined them in 2014. And since then, I've been a project director at the Center for Science Diplomacy of AAAS. And basically what we do is we use science to build bridges with countries where the diplomatic relations, official ones, are strained. For instance, for many years we worked with Cuba, we worked with Iran, with North Korea, countries that the US doesn't have or didn't have a formal diplomatic relation with. That means that the scientists from both countries could not work together very easily because there was no diplomatic or official government structure that could support any exchange or dialogue. So the role of AAAS and many other NGOs outside of government is to facilitate the exchange and relationship building between scientists from countries that have no good relationships at the official level. And this is all to say that we can use science as a language that brings us together, regardless of nationality or political orientation or ideology. And this is what we try to do every day, to bring scientists from around the world together, no matter what the obstacles can be at the political or other dimensions that make it difficult. So I will stop here, and I'll continue when you guys have questions and or want to expand on any of those aspects.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Marga. So from the lab and being alone in the dark in the microscope room to the United Nations to AAAS and building bridges between countries. That's wonderful. And, I think that gives you an idea of, very unexpected things that you can do with science, or non-obvious things you can do with science training. Okay, Rudy, seems you're feeling pretty, I'm not sure what the brackets mean right now.
Sure. Hi, everybody. First of all, let me apologize for the gigantic headset. I work from home, so I rock this bad boy. I've got 2 kids, so it's noise canceling plus directional microphone. It sort of like guards all of my coworkers from occasional baby yelling. So hi, everybody. I'm Rudy Bellani. I actually knew Monica as an undergrad. So I was at Arizona State, and you were, I guess I don't know what university in Puerto Rico.
The University of Puerto Rico in Bayamón.
Okay, gotcha. And so we were both neuroscientists, and we met through, I think, a minority program. So we've known each other for many, many years. So let's see, how do I tell the story? How about this? So coming out of undergrad, I'd done 5 years of research when I was applying to grad school. I've been really fortunate to be in a really nurturing, really caring lab. I'd published like 7 publications. I was like just feeling like top of the world. And I thought really hard about what I wanted to do and what I wanted to study. And so I applied to one university, which was Rockefeller University in New York, because I only wanted to work in one lab. And I was like just so sure, of course I'll get in, that I didn't worry about it. I didn't take the GREs. I was just like, surely you guys will take me. And it was really foolhardy, but I put it this way because I was like that tactical about what I wanted to do next. So I got into grad school and then started down the research project, which was trying to figure out sort of the origins of brain asymmetry in vertebrates. And I don't know, somewhere around year 5, I realized I was just really average. I had what I thought were really good ideas, but like really average lab hands. And I also was just really bored by the same thing. And by year 5, I was really bored of brain asymmetry. So finished the PhD, but somewhere around sort of, year 6, I thought, okay, I need to get a job. But I had lost my love for, like, my hardcore love for science. I was super hardcore, was, the reason I chose asymmetry was because I thought there was another Nobel Prize in it. And there had been other people that had won Nobel Prizes straight out of their grad school years. And I thought, like, that's going to be me. So I went from that guy to somebody who just really didn't care about science at all. But I needed a job, and I thought, look, maybe it's this lab that I'm in that has sort of killed this passion that I've carried for 10 years. Maybe if I go do a postdoc, that'll rejuvenate that love. At the same time, I met this girl that I had no business being with. She was also a PhD student. She's this really incredible woman, and I thought I need to marry her before she realizes the terrible mistake she's about to make. And so I thought, well, I should do that. But I was so broke and, like, come from a poor family. There's no money anywhere to think about anything. So I happened during, like, a low point of how I was feeling emotionally about my work to where I received an email that said, it was from another PhD student from Rockefeller who was a couple of years ahead. And I knew her, but not super well. But she said, hey, thought I just got an offer from this company. I thought you might like it. Their deadline is next Sunday. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I waited. The next weekend came around, and I remembered, like, oh yeah, there was this thing. I should look into it. And I looked, and I went to the website. It was this company I'd never heard of. It was called McKinsey & Company. And I was like, I guess they're a law firm, because you can't tell anything from their website. It just says ridiculously stupid, vague things like, consulting the world's leading companies on their hardest problems or something. I was like, all right, I guess they counsel, like, that's law. And I guess they take PhDs, because they gave her a job, and she was a cancer microbiologist. So I applied. The application was really easy. And then a week later or two, I got an email saying, come in for an interview. And then I emailed that individual. Her name was Sherry, and kind of began to learn what I had applied to. And somewhere along the path of interviewing, I kind of figured out what consulting was. But by then I'd missed every other deadline, so I couldn't think about applying anywhere else. And so I just kind of meandered my way through this process. And at the end was very fortunate to get an offer. But I contrast that path, and I accepted the job. I contrasted that path versus how I chose my lab. Like, my whole life I'd been really tactical, really thoughtful about what I wanted to do, what I was going to study, who was going to turn me into, and my career was this, like, very important thing to me. And then at the very end of my PhD, I sort of was just like, I don't know who's, like, literally the first job application, like, destination that someone sent me is the place I applied to. Not knowing anything about consulting, not knowing anyone in consulting outside of this woman, Sherry, but she had not started yet. But, they offered me a lot, like a salary with a lot of zeros. And, like, as a poor immigrant kid from Bolivia whose parents are poor, I was like, I'll take it. And that was kind of it. And then I, went to McKinsey and spent 2.5 years there. And really, what I realized when I first got there, I thought, oh, this is, like, so cool, and, like, I'm jet setting. And then a couple months in, I was like, this job sucks. Like, this, I work with incredibly smart people on projects that are largely really boring to me. But it's not that the work is inherently boring. Lots of people and lots of my friends are still there, and they love it. And they're excited by it, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. I had just never really given any thought to what I did want to do after grad school, and just kind of winged it wherever I landed. But I was learning so much that I also retrospectively looked back at my PhD and thought, like, well, those are like 7 of the best years that Rudy's ever going to have as an intellectual. And I largely threw them away. Because since I'm not going to be a bird asymmetry, like guy anymore, like, I just wasted 7 years doing the same damn thing every day, a billion times for years. and stopped growing, right? Like your first, second year in grad school, you feel like you develop a lot, you learn all these things, you get exposed to all, like I felt like I was growing, and then I just plateaued. And so this institution, this like world-renowned institution, allowed, hypothetically, like what they pitch is like all this like great world talent that they have to just like coast for years, to coast. Like what a crime, right? Um, and and yet at McKinsey, like they were just constantly kicking my ass, like every day, like I was failing. But if you know, I started at 9 a.m. and I shut my computer down at 1 a.m. every day, and it was just like furious, like no checking Facebook, like lunch was like a gah while you're typing. And so at the end of 2.5 years, I was just a very different human being. I was really, like I had just been trained how to think in a structured manner. And I was so thankful to have had that training. But the whole time I wasn't happy. From like month 3, my wife and I were constantly like, we gotta quit. We can't quit before a year, because then we have to give back that signing bonus and we don't have that money. So we're gonna quit at 1 year. And then like I kept learning and doing, and then so I wrote it out to like 2.75 years or something. And then I left and co-founded but as I reflected upon like the past, I was like, what a ludicrous like path that was, to have ended up just randomly doing something when I had been a very thoughtful person before. And I realized there were probably others like me, and so I co-founded a company called Oyster. We sold it last year for like pennies, but we sold it last year, and it was a company that helped PhDs find alternative careers. We had like all these grand plans, and we were not very good at that, which is why ultimately we sold it. But we learned an incredible amount about how people actually get jobs, because we work with like 24 or 26 companies, helping them find PhDs, and we just learned a lot about that space. And somewhere along the path there, like when we kind of like we'd raise venture funding, and then we'd fail to raise another round of venture funding, and I didn't have the heart to like try again, so we kind of shut it down. And then I was like, for the first time really on the job market, right? Like I had to find a job from the start again, and and I had just had 2-ish years of running this company that helped PhDs find jobs, and I thought, well, surely now I know how to find a job. And and I did find a job, but it was no less like just painful, and it was no less of a bashing on my ego, because even though I thought like, okay, look, I have a PhD from a good school, I then went to McKinsey and kicked some ass for 2.5 years at this fancy place. After that, I went and like ran my own company. Surely people will be like, oh, well, that's like a good thing, and he raised a bunch of money and made a bunch of revenue, so like it was like a thing. The truth is, a lot of companies looked at me and they're like, we don't want this guy. Like, this guy isn't what we need. And then I ended up sort of realizing like, okay, so who am I? What do I want to do? And I ended up at Ernst & Young. So it's another consultancy. If McKinsey's like about 15,000 people, Ernst & Young is 260,000. And so as a PhD who worked with like the most ancient technology in the world, and the biggest thing that I did was I fed birds by hand. So like there's no technology, like it's like stuff like Aristotle would have thought was ancient. I now lead innovation across like this huge suite of software with like millions and millions of dollars of investment every year. And it's not because I'm I'm not like a computer science PhD. I was a behavioral neuroscientist, who wasn't even that good at either of those things. But now, so now I lead a team doing that at Ernst & Young for the last 9 months or so, and I get to work from home, and I live in Pittsburgh, and like I finally figured out like what I like doing.
Thank you, Rudy. That I think you are kind of the embodiment of that cartoon that's like success versus like success.
Yeah.
So thank you. Thank you for that. Last but not least, Edgardo.
Okay, thanks. I want to first thank Monica and Giovanna for inviting me. So for me, the way I ended up where I'm at now is started in grad school. So I'm from Puerto Rico, and I went to the University of Puerto Rico, Rio Piedras. And then I went to Texas for graduate school in neuroscience. I went to UT Southwestern Medical Center at Dallas. And so while I was in graduate school, I started going, they had these running seminars for alternative careers called Quest for a Career. And so I started showing up to all of those, and that really gave me the opportunity to see all the wide, breadth of jobs that I could get with a PhD. And by the end of grad school, I was already thinking, you know what? I don't know if I want to end up being a PI. I should really start getting serious about looking at other things. But also, while I was in grad school, I was in the admissions committee for the graduate school for 2 years. And so that helped me to also talk to a lot of students. And as well, I did recruiting for the school in Puerto Rico. I went on what I call a recruiting tour with one of the deans of the grad school, and we visited 4 schools in Puerto Rico, and it was great. And again, but that interaction with the students I found really rewarding. And so that, that was something that I always had in the back of my mind, like, could I find a job where I can, talk to scientists, talk to students, to postdocs about, anything. And so then when I did, I didn't know what I wanted to do at first, at the end of grad school, but everyone kept telling me, oh, Edgardo, go do a postdoc, doing a postdoc doesn't hurt. And I ended up doing a postdoc. And then I moved to the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And that was one of the best decisions that I ended up making, because during my postdoc, I was exposed to other activities besides research that really helped me into narrowing what I wanted to do. And so during my postdoc, I did 3 years of postdoc, and I was able to do a little bit of consulting, because at Penn they had this program where graduate students and postdocs could join with students from the business school, and they actually did consulting for companies or government agencies for a semester. And so I was exposed to the consulting world, and I decided that I don't like this either. It was interesting, but it was not for me. And so I also joined the Institutional Review Board at Penn, and that is the board that approves clinical protocols. And so it was very interesting. It was completely different. Now this is sort of the regulatory affairs kind of field. And again, it's interesting to always read, okay, what are they going to do to people now, But it was a good experience, and I got to interact with all these other MDs and big shots at the school, and talk about consent forms and protocols, But it was a great experience to have, and I did that for a year. And again, at Penn, they had these seminars for alternative careers, or just not alternative, but other careers outside of academia. They're not alternative anymore, because there's more jobs out there than in academia. So, and so one day I go to this career talk, and it was someone from NINDS, and it sounded great. And at the end they said, oh, if you're interested, or if anyone's interested, there's going to be a position opening soon. And from that day on, I started going on USA Jobs, which is the website that you go look for government jobs, specifically in the federal government. And I kept every day just checking to see when that job posting was going to be released. And I ended up applying for it. And I was interviewed, and that's how I ended up here. And I can say that I really, really enjoy my job. Right now, I'm in the Office of Programs to Enhance Neuroscience Workforce Diversity. And so we work with all of the diversity training mechanisms at NINDS. And so all of you are graduate students, so I'm hoping that you're all thinking about applying for an F-31, right? Yes. And so I work in managing and analyzing the data for all of our diversity programs, from diversity supplements to F31s to R25s, which are research educational grants. And I really enjoy my job. I mean, part of it is customer service to scientists. You know, I talk with students or PIs that are interested in submitting a grant, and so they contact us and they want to get all the details. So how do I apply for this? How do I apply for that? And so it's very important. Also, part of my job is to do outreach and to inform the community of all of the funding opportunities that are out there, and that they should be applying for them, because if, you should take advantage of any opportunity that you have to further your career and further your science. So yeah, that's pretty much how I ended up here.
Awesome. Thank you, Edgardo. So as you can see, very, very diverse paths, very diverse careers. We have people in government and nonprofit, diplomacy, and then more on the business side. So I will, let's see, Francesca, Ariadna, and Luz. I know you've prepared a bunch of questions, so I will let you guys take it away.
So, hi everybody. I think everybody presented themselves and kind of knocked out some of our questions, but that's great. So just to keep in track with, I know it's not a straight line or a straight path, but just as a general advice, what would you recommend that are really important skills to develop to make us good candidates for jobs outside of academia?
Let's see, if any of you can respond. Let's start with you, Edgardo, since you were next.
Okay, so I would say develop your writing skills. That's very important. And effective communication, and have good organizational skills. And the thing is, when I started looking for jobs, you pretty much think that, oh, I don't have any experience other than being on the bench. But when you really think about it, you have project management experience, you have supervisory experience if you've dealt with rotation students or summer students. So you do have some of these skills. The thing is, you have to write it down in a way that sounds, good and that puts you in the spot to be marketable.
Hi, everybody. So I have a little bit of a different take, not necessarily disagreeing with what was said, but I think that it really depends on what job you're trying to get. So, here's let me sort of tell you what we learned, after trying to get 500 PhDs jobs across 2 years, and also while I was at McKinsey, I led PhD recruiting for McKinsey out of the Northeast. So, in every case, companies are looking for people who've already done this job. So if I'm trying to hire like a diversity, like director of diversity for my graduate school, if I'm trying to hire somebody to like review grants, if I'm trying to hire an editor, nobody wants somebody straight out of grad school. Nobody wants somebody straight out of their postdoc. The ideal candidate that if they applied, you'd want to give them the job is the person who just had this job somewhere else that you respect and who somehow, for some random reason, wants to move parallel. That's the perfect candidate because they can do it. They have all of the skills, all of the experiences, and you can pay them the same amount that you'd pay for somebody who's trying to move up into the position. The issue, so hiring managers, when they're looking at candidates, they're trying to find exactly the person who's already done this job. The reality is that very few people want the exact same job that they've just had at a different institution. When people switch jobs, they either want to go into a different path or they want to go, like they can't rise up. So if they're like an editor, they want to become a senior editor. So they move journals, right? A lot of people don't go from being an editor here to an editor there. Like if this is a microbiology journal A and this is microbiology journal B, unless something's happening there, right? So so hiring managers are looking for that person, but they can't find that person because very few people do that, right? It's always these weird circumstances where say somebody like wants to be at home more, or their husband is moving from San Francisco to Washington. So all of a sudden they're like, I just want the same job that I have here that I love, but I'll just do it in Washington now. Those circumstances are few and far between. And so since companies can't get their bullseye, they then start looking at concentric rings out, and the candidates that best approximate the person who's already done it is the person they're going to hire. So let's say that you want to be a journal editor. So you haven't been a journal editor, but maybe you volunteered at your university's journal press for 15 hours a week for the last 8 months. So you can say, I know like the process, I know editors, I like have reviewed X amount of journals. And so all of a sudden, when they're reviewing you, nobody looks at, to date, all you've ever been judged on is potential. This student could be an amazing, incredible scientist if they only had like your training. It's all potential. Grades say potential. But in the job market, it's have you done this thing? And so since you're not bullseye, like can you be one concentric ring out? And so when we were trying to get people hired straight out of grad school or out of their postdoc, it was always like, people would be like, oh, I really want to be an MSL, or I really want to be a da-da-da. And then we'd look at their experiences and be like, you will never get that job, relative to somebody who's like kind of hustled on something that looks like it. And it's no different, like for me, like when I was on the job market, right, I thought like, okay, well, surely like good grades, like good PhD school, like lots of awards and things like will show that I'm a high potential. And then I went to McKinsey where like you just kind of do a bunch of stuff, like, so surely everyone will just see talent. No, like I had to pitch myself as a thing, like I am this person, and all my experiences point to that. And so in that way, if you have a semblance of an idea for what you want to do, the question is not like what's the 1 or 2 key skills. This is my perspective. Not what are the 1-2 skills that will get everyone a job, but rather for the jobs you want, what are the 1 or 2 experiences with like resulting skills that will get you closer to bullseye for what people are hiring for. That's my view.
Maria.
Yeah. So we have a program many of you might be familiar with, is the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowships. And I know policy is not the only alternative career outside of academia, but the way these fellowships work can inform a lot of the strategies that you can follow. So as Rudy was saying, when you enter the job market, you're judged on results, not potential. So then you have to have tangible experience to show very quantitative resumes. But things like fellowships are a little bit in between. So a fellowship allows you to still be judged a little bit on potential and make this transition smoother. So the AAAS fellowship is 1 year immersion into the government in the US, so you have to be a US citizen. But other than that, you require a PhD or a master's if you're an engineer, and you don't need to have experience, as in experience on paper. Sometimes your view of how you can use science for the greater good, how you could use science for policy, what you could improve, or you think science could help improve, can get you there. So you have to write, it's a very competitive process, but it is not all based on your results and accomplishments as any other job opportunity would. So you have to write an essay, but that essay or a briefing paper can be hypothetical. So you can say, well, I work in synthetic biology, and that's how I see the future of the regulation of this issue, blah, blah, blah. And you can, speculate a little bit and can be a little bit fictional in a way. So the committee wouldn't judge you, entirely in those sort of results and tangible experience. So I would just because everything has been said already, I think Rudy gave us an amazing run through. I will add that the transition can be smoother if you go through something like a fellowship. That is something in between that is less, I would say, painful, sort of crashing into the realities of the job market after being in the bubble of academia where you're judged on potential. Especially the way recommendations letters are written, I think needs to change, because I agree that it's all very pink and you know, based on your potential instead of concrete accomplishments. So if you want to learn more about those fellowships, I'm happy to. I'm going to share the link. But that's one way to get your feet on, you know, your foot on the door without having to have this huge experience, because it's a sort of a self. How do you say that? Un pez que se muerde la cola. If you don't have experience, you don't get hired. But if you don't get hired, you don't have experience. So how do you get it? So that's one way, and I'll be happy to talk more about those opportunities.
Wow, thank you.
Catch 22, that's it, the catch 22. I get it. Still back from Spain, it's just not yet fully back.
I think we're really all very, very inspired by all of your stories, but psychologist here, so I kind of have to ask if you felt like you were letting anyone down when you decided that research career wasn't really your end goal, even though you were fulfilling your own ambitions and your dreams, and how did you deal with it? Did anybody hear that? Did I not?
Yeah,
okay.
no,
Okay.
you did. Okay, so I'll start. So absolutely, when I got a job, I was really ashamed of it, genuinely, and I didn't tell anyone except my then girlfriend, now wife, Lindsay. I didn't tell my boss, even though his daughter was a partner at McKinsey. Like, I didn't tell him. I didn't tell my committee. Like, I just held on to it for 8 months. And it was on my last committee meeting when they, like, my like lead person, Corey Bargman, she was like, "So Rudy, what are you gonna do in terms of postdoc? Like, we need to start thinking about postdoc labs for you." And I was like, I'm gonna go into consulting. And you know, she was very generous and really sweet, but still, you know, expressed her disappointment. And I was just really embarrassed. I thought that it was admitting that I was not good enough, and I thought that it was, which, I mean, it kind of was, and I thought that it was admitting that I didn't have kind of the fight in me to keep pursuing it, which was also true, but still kind of an ugly thing to sort of face. And I only actually got over it when I was on a neuroscience panel about 8 months into my time at McKinsey, so there's, like, I don't know, 300 neuroscientists, and the moderator asked a really wise question, which I'd never asked myself, which is, what do you miss most about science? And everyone went along and sort of said, like, oh, I miss the this and I miss the that, and I didn't answer. And she's like, so Rudy, what about you? And I was like, oh, I don't, you know, other people have answered it. And she's like, no, really, like, what, like, well, I want to hear from you. Like, what do you miss most about science? And I thought really hard, and I responded with the answer that I think is still true, which is nothing. Like, I don't miss anything about science. Like, I loved science. Science was my life, my entire identity for a long time. Like, I dumped girlfriends over science, and now I don't miss it at all. It's like, actually, the girlfriend analogy sort of works. It's like, there was this girl that I loved, that I thought I was going to marry, that, like, was my everything. And then we broke up, and I was sad for a while. And then, like, I found someone else, and I'm really happy. And I never think about that person again. And it, like, that was very much my experience. Yeah.
I will say something that's probably uncomfortable to many, and it's about the money. I think we have to be straightforward about that. When you leave the lab, when you leave academia, one of the good things is that you get quite a big of a jump in salary, right? And it's not perhaps correct to put that as a motivation, because we're supposed to be science out of the goodness of our hearts. and we're supposed to just, I mean, I was doing research for, I think, 2 years completely for free. And it never occurred to me that I could ask for money. So compare that to any other sector or industry where you would not work a minute for free, and you would not request a service from anyone for free, because that's not, the way to do it. But in science and academia, it's somehow universally accepted that you can just have a student and have them, or even sometimes postdocs, for free or for very low pay. So many people so many people that I've met in Washington that work, PhD scientists that work in the government or NGOs or any other sector, are the brightest, the most intelligent, successful people I've ever met. And when I was in academia, we are sort of brainwashed, and I use this word, I know it's loaded, but to think that if we leave because it means that we failed or we're not good enough for that. But you have to always think about the incentives and the motivations. If you are a very cheap or free resource for something, they will always try to convince you that that's the best place for you to be, because you are the hands and the labor for some other. So I don't want to get too caught on that. But that's to say that you have to be ashamed to ask for what you're worth, for trying to make a good living and to have good work-life balance. And if that doesn't come easy in academia, you have all the right to look for it elsewhere. And I think we should remove the stigma associated with wanting to have a good standard of living. And that's something that still is a bit taboo in academia, because we're supposed to work for this sort of for the good of the world without regard for our personal lives. And I think there's a limit to that, and it's not healthy to keep pushing that agenda.
I have to say that I agree with what's been said. In my case, when I told my postdoctoral mentor that I was looking for jobs outside of academia, he was slightly disappointed, but also I had such a good personal relationship with him that he really understood that, hey, it's not what I want. And I have to say, always try to look for like extracurricular stuff, to do, because you'll find what you like and what you don't like. And so I told him, and he said, well, great, go forth and be merry. And I have no regrets. I, like Rudy, I don't miss the lab at all. People ask me nowadays, do you miss it? I said, no. I love science. I just don't want to do the science. But I do enjoy now helping other people get their science funded, so.
Great. Thank you. I wanted to add something, because like this is something that I can really identify with, but I'll keep it brief. I felt the shame. I felt obviously I'm not going into academia because I'm not good enough, and that's something that I still sometimes struggle with. Even though I know that I am good, I'm really good at what I do, and I deserve to be where I am. I still feel that sting of, well, you didn't go into academia because you're not good enough. But what I will say, and I think Marcos mentioned this in the chat, it's, you can serve society, and you can serve the communities that you care deeply about through science. It's just that we are often trained to think that we can only do it in one way. Although I did feel that shame and that imposter syndrome, it is through what I do now that I found my voice, that I found my passion. And I would have not done that if I had stayed on the bench. And so, that's something that we just have to fight against, because a lot of it is pressure from the system.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
This question is for Marga, because I'm very interested in science policy. So I want to know specifically your responsibilities as a diplomat, and how, because we know the political situation we're living nowadays, and how this atmosphere is influencing these relationships in science among countries. What are the obstacles you're encountering, the difficulties, what change, all that. So yeah, 2 questions in one.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm not a diplomat, because a diplomat has to be an official representative of a country. So, I mean, we use the word diplomat in a very broad sense, but just not to confuse anyone. You know, a diplomat is someone that has an official credential and is authorized to speak on behalf of the government, and I'm not. But we use this diplomacy in a broader sense to refer to non-governmental relationships. So 2 things. My job, sort of my day-to-day job, is really about building relationships, meaning traveling a lot, and identifying the best counterparts and the best partners in the different countries. And that changes a lot. There's some, I'm viewing your screen now. Is that normal?
No, I think somebody must have been playing with this setting.
Okay. So because we are an NGO, our natural partners would be other NGOs or academia or non-governmental organizations. So we would traditionally partner with other scientific societies or academies of science in other countries that represent the scientific community. So AAAS represents the scientific community in the US, and then there's another society in Brazil that represents the scientific community in Brazil, or another one in Korea, and so on. So traditionally, the government has its own science cooperation mechanisms, and then the non-governmental community that includes academia has other mechanisms. Sometimes they work together very well, so the government tries to advance a scientific agenda by helping countries sort of come together. So the governments are on board and they identify, let's say the US government before would meet with the government of Japan and say, well, we want to advance artificial intelligence research. So here's the best researchers at MIT, and then whoever's the counterpart in Japan, let's work together. So the government can advance that scientific collaboration. And then vice versa. So when the academic scientists feel that they need some government support, for instance, they need a visa or they need a special permit to do field research in a country, they would scientists would enlist the diplomats to help them access those resources. So that's when you have a functioning ecosystem in which the government and the scientists are on the same page. So right now it's not the case. In the US, we're seeing that a lot of the traditional relationships that were handled by the government, in scientific relationships that were going through the government, they no longer happen because the countries don't find their interlocutors in the White House or in the other structures that usually would be the natural partners. And we're seeing a lot of requests for partnership or even information on how to access a specific or particular scientific field or university. And this is not to say that, so the scientific community works across borders and it's been independent for a long time. And that's why it works, because science is universal and it doesn't need a government endorsement. But when the government is not supporting science, makes everything much more difficult, and the importance of the non-governmental actors like us suddenly gains, I think, a lot more traction. And things that might seem bureaucratic or policy only, like executive orders, impact the scientific community greatly. For instance, the executive order on immigration, targeting 7 countries, those citizens couldn't come into the US. Many of them were scientists, and that really stops the free flow of people and ideas that is necessary for science to function. So in that case, we as AAAS, we go out and say, well, this is not right, because we have a guest that's coming to our meeting that is from a country that is now banned from traveling to the US. And we have to go out and kind of advocate for that. So it is a very interesting time. And it's a quite different situation with this administration that we're used to. Okay.
Thank you, Marga. Do you have any more questions? Could be questions our discussants prepare, everybody else.
I have a question.
Go for it, Diana.
Hey, so I'm as well interested in science policy. And I guess I just wanted maybe some advice of things that I can do while I'm still in my PhD to be a strong, well-rounded candidate for the fellowships. I do plan on applying for them. Mm-hmm. So kind of like things that would look good in my CV that are geared towards that kind of career.
How about I send you a link right now?
Yes.
So I want to reference something that was said before about SALT and about Yara's. So how many of you have participated in the New York Academy of Sciences program? I mean, it was mentioned here, and I like that someone said that you are like cousins. So this idea of creating the programs that allow grad students and even undergrads to be better prepared to make this transition. Really, this is something that we've been discussing for many, many years with Monica, with Yara, and others. And we are trying to create the opportunities that we didn't have. So no one has to reinvent the wheel and sort of have this convoluted path that we had, and really make it easy for you guys and everyone that's coming after us. And so we have all created programs. Basically, we're building this network of programs that is a network of people in the end. And we're trying to give you the range, or the broadest possible range of options that you can take. And if you, for example, if you're interested in science, policy, and diplomacy, specifically science diplomacy, these are the workshops that I lead. So people like you can come to Washington and learn and network, so they are better prepared for the moment of writing your application. Because it's not about your application, it's not only about your application, it's about the network. And that you can do on Twitter, but you need to have some in-person interactions as well. That's very, very important. So I just sent the link that is SciDip Leadership. It's a leadership program in science diplomacy, so it will help you understand this global dimension. So it's science policy, but global. So if you're interested in not just the domestic aspect of science policy, but how this relationship between countries works, especially the countries that are more interesting in terms of being less friends of the United States, or now I would say the US is less friends with them. Those case studies and examples can help you understand that. And we try to do as much of experiential learning as we can. So we do simulation and role-playing games that I believe you've also experienced. And that's to simulate a negotiation. So if you're a scientist and you can't imagine what it is to negotiate, a high-level resolution on something. So we put you in that scenario and we give you a role, and then you play this character, and it helps you put yourself in the shoes of a negotiator or a policymaker. So when you have to do it for real, you have some experience, and we try to prepare you as much as possible during your graduate studies. So when you have when you have to pitch yourself, or you have to write your proposal or your ideas, you have something to build on, instead of just being a generic, I'm interested in science policy and I'm very excited, and that's it. So this is something that can boost up your application. And I not because I designed it, I really think it's a helpful step, and it's something that I wish I had when I was at your stage, and that's why I created it, so I can help expedite this process, because I think it's necessary that we expedite this as much as possible.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Marga. I wanted to kind of take that question to Rudy and Edgardo, because I think, for science policy is an example where there are programs, but not for every non-research, non-academic career. There's not a program to make a transition into many, actually, different careers. And Rudy did touch upon this a little bit when he was talking about skills and like the bullseye. But I wanted to ask you about, Rudy and Edgardo, about other strategies that people can use to make that transition. In the chat, we've been talking about volunteering, and I can certainly advocate for the importance of that. But I was wondering what Rudy and Edgardo could add to that.
Edgardo, do you want to go first?
You can go first if you want.
Yeah, I mean, right. So I think of it as there's basically three buckets in terms of like what are highly efficient ways to break into a career. The first is, let's call them sort of trial or developmental related programs, like the AAAS Fellowship, like McKinsey and BCG. They all have kind of consulting weekends. The second bucket is around volunteering, right? So it's basically where you hustle a developmental type opportunity within your university or geographic location, right? So you go and work at your tech transfer office for a little while because you want to then go do TTO stuff, or you're not at a school that sort of like competes typically for spots in these kind of like very select weekends for a BCG or whatever. And so you start doing consulting projects with the consulting team, like the consulting club, like for real clients with real impact. Then the third bucket, and both of those have been talked about now. The third bucket is networking, which I'm sure you guys have talked a bajillion amount. But for me, so I don't think we need to go into the power of that. But for me, those are the three most effective ways of like, if my son, when he's 18 or whatever, if I want him to, or however old, like I want him to go get a job, those are the three main strategies I would push him for. Outside of that, I don't really have anything to add.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot to add either, but for me, what worked was the volunteering, like finding those activities that will provide you with some sort of experience that you can then, that can make you marketable, and also networking. I mean, my current boss, I had met her at a Society for Neuroscience conference a few years before I got my job. And so if you are interested in a government position, what I would suggest is when you go to your conferences, look for your program officers, if you are trying to apply for grants, go to the NIH booth or go to any governmental agency's booth at conferences and talk to them. That's how you start networking, at least for, with government officials. And that can come up really handy later, and again, that's how my boss, I had met her like a couple of years before I applied for this job. And she remembered me. I was like, what? So that was good.
In a way, think about what you just heard, right? So apply to programs that you kind of know about or have heard about. 2, hustle experiences. You've probably heard that a bunch. 3, network. Like you've heard that like forever. So what is the takeaway? The takeaway is that there isn't actually like some secret that is like out there that if we could just share it, then all of you would just be zip zapping it right into the jobs that you want. The reality is like those are like the tried and true ways to be able to get jobs. And the reason not everyone does those is because those things are annoying and hard, right? So it is uncomfortable to go network and like be all selly and charming, right, with people you don't know. Like that sucks, but it's effective. Applying to things like, it's like an ego, like rejection. I thought I was done with the applications in grad school, like, and that was terrible. Like that's hard, so I don't do it. And volunteering, like it can be everything from like, I'm a mom with 2 kids and grad school. Like I don't have time to volunteer, right? A very real issue. Or like, I don't know, my boss wants me to work all the time. I'm really stressed about all these things. My boyfriend's crazy. Like, there's the reasons why we don't do it. But these tried and true ways are nevertheless like the best ways to do it. And while it is probably unrealistic that you're going to be able to do all 3, just do one. Like, let me give you a powerful anecdote, or at least like I think it's a powerful anecdote. So when we'd work with companies, by the end we were working with companies to learn how we could build software that would connect them with the right person. So we were manually doing it to learn the process as headhunters, right? So we were headhunters while we were building tech on the side. And by the end, we got really good. Like we could basically, if a company said, this is the human we want, and we'd interview them, figure out who the human is, then we had like a hit rate of about 30%. So think of it like 1 in 3. That's a really, really high hit rate. How did we do that? What we stopped doing was sending them really smart, fancy people that had a lot of potential and were charming. We just sent them people that had basically kind of done that. That was it. Like if I could just like, if on this axis is like how approximate to the job you are, and these are your odds, it is not a linear line. Like it is an exponential. So it's like doing a handful of activities, or like I work at the TTO office for a year and a half. The likelihood of you getting a tech transfer job is like 1,000x another really smart, fancy Yale PhD. So there's no secret here. You just need to invest in it now, because it takes time to build those experiences, takes time to build those networks, takes time to apply and get into and spend like and go to these kind of weekend programs. But you're all like in the right phase, right? Like Monica, I think, shared that something like 60 or 70% of you are in your 3rd or 4th year. You got years. If you just do it now, these same tried and true things that like mom and dad and like uncles and like these bozos are all telling you to do, like you will be a million times more successful.
Marga, you're muted.
I want to add something about how I got my internship at the UN. So when I applied, I had no experience to show. So I was against, I think, 10,000 people every year that try to get an internship at the UN. So instead of sending the traditional cover letter and CV and everything that you are asked to do, I took a different approach. I thought there's no indication that they welcome applications from scientists. So they're going to look at me like I'm super weird and out of their box, and perhaps that will hurt me. So I need a way to make myself attractive in a way that other applicants are not. So instead of doing the what they told me to do. So I'm not saying you should break the rules all the time, but sometimes you should go out of the rules a little bit around, because instead of sending a cover letter, I just send them a question. I had researched their entire website. I didn't find a single scientist that was on staff on the UN headquarters building in New York. And I asked them this question: how do you manage to handle those issues that are all science related, like climate change, like food security, like pandemics, like security, environmental stuff, without science on staff? I said, I'm very interested in the answer, because I would like to know how you do it. And if you need some help, I'm happy to come join you. So instead of a cover letter, I send them a question. I identified the area I thought they needed the most help with, without being, of course, like disrespectful or, a snob scientist. And that's what stood out. They had 10,000 applicants, but for some reason, my question was, more catchy than a pile of generic cover letters. And they called me 12 hours. It took 12 hours only. In the middle of the night, I was in Australia, so it was like 4 a.m. And the person who would become my boss in a few months told me, we are a bit concerned because we never had a PhD in this office, and you are overqualified. And clearly you have a science PhD. We never had we have 19-year-old international relations or political science students. So we are concerned you're going to be bored, or you will find this work extremely not interesting. And I said, well, so how about I said, let's do this. You give me whatever tasks an intern is supposed to do, and I'm going to do that for half a day, 4 hours. And because they were not paying, they don't pay you, so I think you have a lot of room to maneuver, but people just don't know that. I said, for 4 hours a day, I'll do whatever you ask me to do as part of the intern duties, and for the other 4 hours, I do whatever I want with the resources and the data and the information that you have. And they were a bit surprised, but they said, sure, whatever. So I went there and I found this pile of documents that no one was looking at. Those documents were the member states, the UN countries, basically almost every country in the world, that submit statements to the UN, and they didn't have capacity to process them, so basically no one reads them. And they just sit there. And I'm like, this is too bad, right? There's all this member state contribution that no one reads. And I developed, I thought, what are the things that I know how to do? Research, writing, compiling information, making sense of information. So as a PhD, as a scientist, there were things that I knew how to do that I could translate for that entirely new world. And I designed some algorithms that allow me to extract information from those statements. And I ended up writing a paper and a very nice report out of my internship. This is something that was not part of the job description. It was not part of anyone's expected output, but I did that for myself. So you have to think about what they want you to do as part of the job, but also what you want to get out of it. And if you find a balance between what they want from you and what you can get out of it, and so ideally it would be aligned, it would be the same thing, so that what they want from you is also what you want. But in that situation, because it was a transition from something that was extremely foreign to me, and I was extremely foreign to them. So the way to come together was like, I'll do what you want for 4 hours, and you let me do what I want for another 4 hours. And that paper that I wrote was my sort of key to everything else. So I could go around Washington and say, now I have credentials because I wrote a science policy paper for the UN. And that's how you get the ball rolling. And then everything is much easier after you have that one proof that you can do it. But basically the bottom line is that you have to create that for yourself. And you have to think out of the box and find that one thing that no one has thought about, but you did.
That's awesome, Marga. I there's something that Marga said once in a talk that I love. What is it like? If something about building a table. What is that you say?
That was at Sagna. Someone made like a meme out of it on Twitter.
It was something like, you know, don't look for a seat at the table, build the table. So it's like, you know, you can hustle and like build this thing on your own. I mean, and I think it's obviously scary to do that, but it's also very exciting.
I'm gonna share my I wrote up this story for Science magazine. I'll just share that with you now.
Okay, yeah, you can post it on the chat.
I'll post a few links, yeah.
I wanted to bring in Mani's question from a little bit ago in the chat, because I think that is something that potentially a lot of people face. Mani, do you want to go ahead and ask that?
Now can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, for some reason the headphones don't work. I'm on the down low. I think Rudy said he was on the down low with my advisors about what I want to do a little bit, because I'm not sure I want to be in academia for the rest of my life. So I'm unsure about what do you do when you need letters and that kind of thing, because I've been in academia nonstop for 11 years. So, so those are the people that can comment on my skills and be specific. You know, it could comment on more than my personality. They've actually worked with me. So I worry about applying for jobs and so forth and not having anyone that can speak to what I can actually do.
Yeah, so how do you deal with, you know, we were talking earlier about that stigma of leaving academia, and, you know, it's not uncommon that advisors and PIs are like, well, if you're not in academia, I'm disappointed. You know, so how do you deal with that when you're going to find jobs and you need somebody to recommend you strongly, and maybe your advisor is not on board?
Well, I would say that here is where having a mentor is important. The mentor and advisor are not the same thing. Your advisor can be a mentor, but you can have a mentor that is not your advisor. And I mean, the thing is, in my case, I was in academia since, you know, I was doing research since undergrad. And even though I ended up applying for a job outside of academia, I still had my advisors as references, but I also had a grad school mentor as a reference. And some of my colleagues, you know, some of the other postdocs that I had worked with as from when I was a graduate student, by the time I was applying for a job, they already had their own positions, you know, their own faculty positions, and so I added them as well as references.
Yeah, any other advice in that sense? I have some ideas, but Marga or Rudy, anything?
I think that's becoming less and less important. I mean, if you want to, I mean, because everybody knows that your PI almost always will not be on board of you living, and you have to hide everything until the last minute. I think it's okay if you don't have a reference from that person. I mean, I personally don't have a very close relationship right now with my PhD advisor, and that's okay. So it hasn't had any negative impact in my career, because it's kind of accepted that, you know, in the previous thinking now, because the thinking is changing so fast. I think it's okay. I want to make one point about the mentor. Your supervisor, PhD advisor is not your mentor necessarily. Many times it's not. But then there's this third figure, which is a sponsor. So mentor and sponsor, these are two different figures. So if you're not familiar with the sponsor concept, basically a mentor is someone that will advise you and will coach you, but at the end of the day, you're on your own. So when you go to an interview, that's you. So the mentor is not there with you, right? So someone that can help you prepare, but will not be there when you have to, make any of the big steps or moves. A sponsor is someone that will believe in you and either support you financially or use his or her network to advance your career. So basically, they will put a bet on you. They will say, this is an amazing person that I want to see climbing up, and I will make use of my network to actively place this person in positions that allow them to succeed. And that means they will put sometimes their reputation on the line, their network, their social capital, their political capital, and their money. Sometimes they will, hire you directly. And if not, they will call someone and say, you need to hire this person. So that's okay. This is not something like shady or anything. It's really how many of these circles work. And I think we should be more comfortable with more direct support to try to nurture this next generation of scientists who are, branching out and sort of spanning many boundaries. And that's something that is sometimes not explicit, that you don't say, oh, you become my sponsor, right? So you have to cultivate the relationship, and then at some point this person will feel comfortable with recommending you and putting you up for opportunities beyond this, just the mentorship relationship that's between you and the mentor. The sponsorship is between you, the sponsor, and whoever the third party or company or whatever you're going to. They will actively vouch for you and help you get that position, especially in the beginning. Then you're kind of okay. I think the first one is the important one. Then you kind of want to grow and you can sort of go on your own. But looking for sponsors, it's important. I'm going to post an article on the sponsorship versus mentorship, so you get a little bit of an idea.
Great. Thank you so much, Marga. Okay, we have about 5 minutes left. So I wanted to put a request for last minute questions.
Hey, Rudy.
Go for it.
Hi.
I'm just curious about how you guys match up, like the people that go to your website or whatever with their jobs. Like, how do you do that? And can you tell me more about consulting as well? Thanks.
Yeah, sure. So the website doesn't exist anymore. We sold it, but well, there's a way that we did it which didn't really work, which is why we were trying to do it by hand to kind of figure out how to make it work. But it just goes back to that bullseye analogy. I really, really believe in that. And when we were when the survival of the company depended on us being able to transact talent quickly because they paid us if they hired you, that was the best predictor by far. So like, how close to bullseye were you? If you were bullseye, like it's, almost 100%. It's just like a personality thing, and most people are fine with a little coaching. So I really think about the bullseye model. Now there are jobs like consulting that are much more open, right? They'll take basically any experience and call it leadership, any experience and call it accomplishment. So you might be thinking like, I want to be a policy person. So you do like the AAAS fellowship, you go and volunteer for this thing or that thing, or you help write things, or you like launch like a pugwash group out of your university, whatever. All of those things which are directed to science policy, if science policy doesn't work out or you change your mind, they can be leveraged to consulting, which is just a generalist job. What will effectively never be used. What they want are just smart, capable people who have intangible skills. And the way to demonstrate intangible skills is typically through accomplishment in these kind of endeavors. So as somebody who, so I've reviewed I don't know, 3,000 applicants for McKinsey, and I personally interviewed, I don't know, like 150. And then we worked with consultancies to get them PhDs. The number one thing that we look for is exactly what I just denoted, like accomplishment in anything. And now there are tricks to sort of highlighting accomplishment, right? So the way that we might, for example, write a resume as we apply to these positions would look something like, PhD, studied the developmental origins of XY thingamajig and this cell type, whatever, and then at the bottom you'd list publications or posters or something. The way we would write that same bullet would be something like this. It'd be like PhD, microbiology, university, year, first bullet, like discovered new methodology for something or other, patented, like 2 publications, 2 posters, sessions, whatever. Basically, like, they don't care what you studied. They don't care about that. They just want to see, like, you always start with a verb in the past tense, like discovered, created, modified, like found, whatever. Then what you found in as quantified of a thing as possible. So like, like increased, like fidelity of assay, 100x, 2 publications, 1 poster, like, so it just reads like accomplishment. Like, that's what you want your resume to look like for a consultancy, right? Because then when they interview you, they'll get to know you. But what they see is like, okay, anything this person does, they kick butt at it. In terms of what consulting is like, so look, like I'm now doing innovation stuff, right? Consultancy can be a nice way to sort of like take this tiny little like area focus that you have, go into this massive spinner that allows you to have really great exposure and a whole bunch of retraining in business to then remold yourself for something else. So people basically reinvent themselves, through a handful of years at consultancies, and it can be a really wonderful experience for those of us that don't know what we want to do next. We could talk through all kinds of consultancy things, and I've got all kinds of frameworks to think about it. But actually, I think Dropout Club leveraged a presentation that we used to give at Oyster, which I think is like probably the best presentation specifically for PhDs on how to think about consulting. And I think if you go to Dropout Club and check out the resources section, there's somewhere in there, there's like a PowerPoint you can use. But in any case, the way to think about opportunities in consulting is that there are the big management consulting firms like the BCGs, McKinseys, and then all the way at the bottom, or like on the spectrum, are like the tiny niche consultancies, say like the life science consultancies like LEK. And the experiences will be different across them in a number of ways. Lifestyle will be terrible here, like not great here. Pay will be much better here than here. The breadth of experiences will be much broader here than here. But here you'll be doing very high level ideation strategy stuff. Down here you're going to be doing implementation, like operational stuff. The difference being that if you're working, for example, for a pharmaceutical company, let's say Merck, and McKinsey's going to come in and basically define their R&D pipeline for the next 5 years. Big idea stuff, like where's science headed, like where's technology moving, like it's that like $1 billion level type thinking. Then when they're like, okay, neuroscience is not the area because the ROI doesn't make sense. You really need to go after cancer therapeutics, like where CRISPR's going to be applied is going to be like all like in vivo, like bone marrow stuff. Like that's where you got to go. Done. We're out of here. You paid us a lot of money. Then they bring in another consultancy that's now going to like take the workforce and like figure out how to change it over. Somebody else is then going to come in and like handle the like firing or moving. Then somebody else is going to like, so as you move down the, down like the action chain, you get narrower and narrower, but in terms of activity, but through that you gain different types of expertise, right? So if your goal, so most of us are obsessed with prestige, so we just like want to go to the best university, publish in the best journal, go to the best postdoc with the fanciest name. Like that's how we think about it. So when people are applying to consultancies, they think like, well, if McKinsey gives me an offer and then LEK gives me an offer, I know which one I'm going to choose. That's a terrible, terrible way to make a decision. The way to think about the decision is A, what kind of life do you want to lead? This is going to be a terrible, like life-sucking life. It'll pay you well. This, you can be like a 9 to 5. Right? And for different people, they want different things, and you should be just honest with yourself about that. You also might just be in a different place. So what I always say is like, if you're single, do the harder thing because you'll be a better baseball player at the end of it, right? Because like this one's going to make you swing a bat or throw a basketball, whatever, pick your analogy. Like this one's going to make you swing a bat for 14 hours a day, and this one's going to make you swing a bat for 9 hours a day. Times 2 years of difference, like you've swung a bat a lot more, so you'll just be better baseball player. But if you have a significant other, if you just like hanging out with your dog, if you like have children, then like life matters, and this might not be able to help you sustain that kind of like the life that matters to you. So be a little strategic about it. Beyond that, right? Like if what you want to be is be the COO of a company, then McKinsey makes a lot of sense, right? Like McKinsey, I think, is the #1 bridge for CEOs in Fortune 500 companies. But a lot of us don't want to do that. A lot of us just like want to have like a cool job doing like clinical research or like running studies or like operational implementation, not strategy stuff. In those jobs, a McKinsey guy competing with an LEK guy, no chance. LEK will get that because LEK's done that. Like in my resume, when I like go, I'll tell people like, oh, I did like big strategy stuff. Like, isn't that impressive? And they're like, we don't need a big strategy stuff. We got a strategy unit over there. We need someone who's going to come in and run this clinical study. And this LEK person's done it. So with a little foresight into like who you want to be, how you want to do it, you can think more strategically about the options across consulting. All right. That's a quick summary.
Thank you. And I think that is actually a great way to end the conversation, because precisely the purpose of this program is to get you to think about, what your career goals are and give you the tools so that you can achieve them. So I want to thank once again Marga, Rudy, and Edgardo for your time and for your insight and for all of the wisdom that you dropped on us today and the articles, the resources that you've sent. We really, really, really appreciate it. Also, thank you everybody for your questions, and we will see you next time. Thank you so much.